Mr. Floyd died from a low level of oxygen, and this caused damage to his brain that we see, and it also caused a PEA arrhythmia that caused his heart to stop.
And by PEA, you mean pulseless electrical activity?
Correct. It's a particular form of an abnormal beat of the heart, an arrhythmia, a particular form of it.
Is this what some persons might refer to as asphyxia?
Yes, it has been called asphyxia. To me, it's not terribly helpful. It just, what we're really talking about is a low level of oxygen. Other people talk about hypoxia. That again is just a Latin term meaning a low level of oxygen. So all of this is just really other words for a phenomenon that is a low level of oxygen.
Have you formed an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to what the cause is or was for the low level of oxygen in Mr. Floyd?
Yes, I have.
Would you tell us what that is?
The cause of the low level of oxygen was shallow breathing, small breaths, small tidal volumes, shallow breaths that weren't able to carry the air through his lungs down to the essential areas of the lungs that get oxygen into the blood and get rid of the carbon dioxide. That's the alveoli at the bottom of the lung.
Dr. Tobin, would using a short video that you prepared help you explain to the jurors how oxygen gets into the lungs and the body? How we take in oxygen?
Yep.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 950. Can you describe first what that is?
So here we're looking at the lungs inside a body, and we see here that you can see the windpipe up at the top, the trachea, and then that splits into the bronchial tubes. And also you can see the diaphragm down at the bottom. And when the diaphragm contracts, there will be air moving.
The jurors can't see it yet, so I'm just having you just identify.
Oh, I'm sorry, terribly sorry. I apologize.
Yeah, I'm going to offer it, Your Honor. Exhibit 950.
950 is received.
Yeah, please proceed. We can, we'll display it so the jurors can see it.
Okay, so now we're looking, and you can see the contraction of the diaphragm. That's the kind of pink area down at the bottom. We see air going down through the windpipe and then proceeding down to the bronchial tubes. And then it was going to continue down the bronchial tubes until it will reach out to the air sacs, which will be the alveoli. And now we're seeing that we're moving down here, and these are like the grape-like structures down at the bottom, and this is where all the action occurs. The oxygen goes across those air sacs, and also the CO2 goes across them, then it's expelled back out. So that's everything in a very rapid video.
So then what happened in the case of Mr. Floyd that relates to the shallow breathing that resulted in his low oxygen?
So there are a number of forces that led to that the size of his breath became so small. And so there are a series of forces higher up that are leading to that. And the main forces that are going to lead to the shallow breath are going to be that he's turned prone on the street, that he has the handcuffs in place combined with the street, and then that he has a knee on his neck, and then that he has a knee on his back and on his side. All of these four forces are ultimately going to result in the low tidal volume, which gives you the shallow breaths that we saw here. And so the air will not be able to reach those air sacs we just saw in the video, where the oxygen is exchanged and the carbon dioxide is removed.
Doctor, is there a concept that in the respiratory medicine field known as dead space?
Yes, there is.
How does that relate to Mr. Floyd?
So if you think of the video back all the way until you saw those clusters of grapes, where you saw the blood vessels surrounding the alveoli, everything up to there is dead space. So as you're breathing in through your nose, your mouth goes down through your windpipe, down through the bronchial tubes, radiating out until it reaches the air sacs. Up till you get to the air sacs, it's all dead space, because the reason we call it is because no oxygen can get across those bronchial tubes. No carbon dioxide can get across it. The oxygen and the carbon dioxide, the only place that gets across is those little grape-like structures. So everything in the lungs before that is dead space.
So you mentioned several reasons for Mr. Floyd's low oxygen, and I just want to capture those for the jury, and then we'll talk about them. You mentioned one, handcuffs and the street. Right?
Correct.
You mentioned knee on the neck.
Yep.
Sorry for my writing. You'll know what I didn't get an A in school. The prone position.
Yep.
And then the knee on the back, arm inside. Were those the four?
Yep, these are the four.
Okay. So we want to talk about each of these, but before we do that, might it be helpful for explaining your testimony to the jury for them to see the relative positioning of the various officers on Mr. Floyd's body when he was subdued on the ground?
Yes, I think that would be very helpful.
Did you assist in preparing an illustration to show the relative position of the officers on the ground?
Yes, I did.
And let me show you what's been marked as Exhibit 949. Could you just tell us, describe generally for the record what it is?
I mean, I watched the videos and certain segments of the videos hundreds of times, and it's very difficult to kind of get an overall view of where everybody is positioned, because you're seeing different videos from different angles. And so the artist has taken all the different videos here and he's combined them into one moment in time, and you can see here, and also he will remove the police vehicle, so you're going to get a better view. So you're looking kind of at a bird's eye view of where Mr. Floyd is lying and where the officers are positioned in relationship to Mr. Floyd.
So the purpose of this is to show the relative positions of the officers on the
Correct.
side. Your Honor, we would offer Exhibit 949.
Any objection? 949 is received.
So what point in time, if you told us that this is at a particular point in time?
Right, it is a particular point in time. I don't remember the exact minute, second at the top of my head, but it is like...
It was 8:21 and 44 seconds.
That's exactly correct.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So let's walk through Exhibit 949, Brent, if you could advance it. And Doctor, tell us what we're seeing.
Okay. Yep. Now you can see the car is being rotated. You're able to see Officer Chauvin, you're able to see Officer King, and then Officer Lane down at his feet. You see underneath Mr. Floyd, and now the car is being rotated. Now the car has been removed. And so you're able to see how they're positioned at different points. In terms of, with Officer Chauvin with his left knee on the neck, his right knee on Mr. Floyd's arm and chest, and then you can see here Officer Lane holding his legs, and then you can see Officer King with his knee on his torso.
So this represents a snapshot in time, as you told us. Did the officers' positions change over time as they were there on the ground?
Yes, the officers' positions changed over time, and also the position of Mr. Floyd himself changed over time, and these become relevant in how we evaluate everything.
And was it something you factored into your analysis then?
Yes.
Did you consider where Mr. Chauvin's left knee was during the encounter?
Yes. For Officer Chauvin's left knee is virtually on the neck for the vast majority of the time.
And when you say vast majority, are you able to be more
It's
specific?
more than 90% of the time in my calculations. There's certain times where it becomes difficult because you don't get a good view of where it is. So for example, I know that an Officer Chauvin's right knee is on his back 57% of the time. The reason I'm not able to say for the 43% is that I don't get a good view. I can other times don't have a good view of exactly where it is.
So did you focus on the first 5 minutes and few seconds?
Yes, I focused on the first 5 minutes, 3 seconds, because that is up to the time that we see evidence of brain injury.
So if Mr. Chauvin's right knee was on his back from time to time, at other times it was placed where, in your observation?
It was placed on his arm and then rammed into Mr. Floyd's left chest. So really, whether you're making a distinction of whether the knee is on the chest per se, or whether it's on the left arm and rammed in against the left chest, from the point of view of breathing, the effects are extremely similar.
So let's turn to the number one on the oh yes, on the dot cam. So I wanted to turn back to the notes that the number one here that written down for the reasons you told us for Floyd's low oxygen, Mr. Floyd's low oxygen, handcuffs and the street, to talk about the first one. Could you first, Dr. Tobin, tell us how these various mechanisms, the four that you've
this is fairly simple. So the way we breathe, we have two big muscles that help us with breathing. We have the diaphragm and we have the rib cage muscles. The diaphragm does about 70% of what we need for breathing, and about 30% of it comes from the rib cage. And when the diaphragm contracts, or the rib cage contract, they expand the chest. And when you expand the chest, then air flows in from outside, and it's coming in. And that's all that happens on inspiration. But to expand the chest, there's two crucial actions that have to happen. And we refer to these by the terms pump handle and bucket handle. So if bucket handle is simple. So if you have a regular bucket that you carry water with, and you lift up the handle of the bucket, the handle comes up like this. And so when you contract your diaphragm, you are performing a bucket handle movement on the rib cage. So you contract your diaphragm like that, and each time as you inspire, you can see it yourself. As you inspire, each of you there in the jury, you inspire, you see that your rib cage is going outwards like that. That's a bucket handle movement. The second movement that you have is called the pump handle. And this reflects to an old water pump that would be in the yard for pumping out water. And so you have the handle at the top of the pump, and you lift up the handle of the pump each time, and the water comes out the spout at the bottom. So you're filling up, getting your container of water. So with that action you're lifting up here, this refers to the front to back movement of the chest wall. So with the pump handle, your chest goes out with each breath. And so you can do it yourself. As you take a deep breath, you can feel that front to back, you're expanding your chest. The front to back expansion of your chest is with your pump handle. At the same time, you're doing both of them at the same time. At the same time you're doing that, your chest is expanding from side to side, and that's with your bucket handle. So both of these are occurring, and these are vital. Without these, you can't breathe. If you don't have the bucket handle working and the pump handle working, there's nothing happening. There's no air going to get in there.
So, Doctor, do you have a photograph that you brought that would help to better understand the pump handle and bucket handle?
Yes.
Let me show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 951. Do you recognize what this photograph depicts?
Yes.
Is it an accurate portrayal of a certain incident, disaster?
Yes. Yes.
Would it help to explain the testimony?
Yes. So this is an event that happened in England.
Dr.
Sorry,
Tobin,
I'm
just
sorry,
one moment.
I apologize.
Yeah, I need to offer sooner, Your Honor. We offer Exhibit 951.
Any objection?
Yeah, I have an objection to this, Your Honor. Can we have a sidebar?
All right. Sidebar. Objection is sustained.
Doctor, in this case, were you able to observe whether Mr. Floyd's breathing was impacted by the handcuffs and the placement on the street?
Yes, I was.
What did you observe, Dr. Tobin?
What I observed is particularly is in terms of the hands of the police and the handcuffs, particularly on the left side. So they were forcing his left wrist up into his chest, forcing it in tight against his chest, forcing it high up. And you have to keep in mind that the opposite side of this is the street. So he was being squashed between the two sides. And so this meant that he couldn't exert his pump handle because, I mean, the street totally blocked his pump handle. There was no way he could do any front to back movement. And again, the way they were pressing in on the back, there was absolutely no way that he could do any front to back movement. Then in addition, because of the knee that was rammed in against the left side of his chest, sometimes the knee was down on the arm or in against the chest, so this would have the same effect. So basically, on the left side of his lung, it was almost like a surgical pneumonectomy. It was almost to the effect as if a surgeon had gone in and removed the lung. Not quite, but along those lines. So there was virtually very little opportunity for him to be able to get any air to move into the left side of his chest. So he was going to be totally dependent on what he'd be able to do with the right side.
Have you selected any footage from the body-worn cameras that you feel depicts Mr. Floyd's struggles to breathe?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 944. And first, would you describe what it is?
What you're seeing here is on the...
Dr. Tobin, the jurors aren't seeing it yet. It's just describing it for the record.
Just for foundation on what it is.
They will not see this. I'm describing what I'm seeing.
For now, yes.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. What I'm seeing is that his left hand is being grabbed by the police officers. So that's a handcuffed left hand, and it's being pushed into his chest. So he's just not able to expand that. In addition, what I'm seeing... Sorry. Oh, I apologize. I apologize. I didn't.
So let's hold off and turn it
Okay,
back.
I'm
Thank you,
sorry.
Judge.
My misunderstanding.
Your Honor, we'll offer State's Exhibit 944.
Any objection? 944 is received.
All right. Now, Dr. Tobin, the jurors can see it.
Okay.
So would you-
I apologize.
No, it was quite all right. Would you tell us what's the significance?
So, I mean, now you're able to see here with the yellow arrow, you're able to see that the officer is holding Mr. Floyd's left hand. He's holding it very firmly. There's a very firm grasp on it. And then Mr. Floyd's left hand is being pushed in against his chest. Also, we're able to see just on the side that Officer Chauvin's knee is coming in, and that's compressing in against his side as well. So the ability to expand his left side here is enormously impaired. And also you're seeing that the size of the chain between the two, the right side and the left side, is very short. So his whole left arm is also being pulled over. And so it's preventing him also from expanding the right side. I've been focusing on the bucket handle and the pump handle on the left, but you can also see here that these are impaired, his ability to expand his chest. And of course, the key factor you must keep that isn't kind of, in a sense, seen here in one sense, is the street. The street is what is having a huge effect because he's jammed down against the street. And so the street is playing a major role in preventing him from expanding his chest.
Thank you. If you could clear the screen, Your Honor.
Dr. Use these styles if you need to use to draw on the screen.
Thank you.
Now, did you select another still image that you observed as Mr. Floyd struggled to breathe?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 942. And if you could just identify it.
I identified.
So do you recognize this as the still image that you selected?
Yes, I do.
Your Honor, we offer State's Exhibit 942.
Any objection? 942 is received.
And could you tell us, Dr. Tobin, what's the significance of this image, of what we see here?
What you're seeing is slightly different on the two images, but they marry together. If you look on the left side, you see his finger is pushing against the street. You also see the hands here of the officers around his left hand. You can see the left handcuffed arm. As we discussed, you're seeing a more clear view here, how it's been really rammed into the back of his back. There's just no way he's going to be able to expand that. But with the left image, you see the finger on the street. Then over on the right image, you see his knuckle against the tire. And to most people, this doesn't look terribly significant, but to a physiologist, this is extraordinarily significant, because this tells you that he has used up his resources and he is now literally trying to breathe with his fingers and knuckles. Because when you begin to breathe with your rib cage and your diaphragm. The next thing you recruit after that is your sternomastoid muscle, which is the big muscle in your neck. And then when those are wasted up, then you're relying on these types of muscles, like your fingers, to try and stabilize your whole right side, because he's totally dependent on getting air into the right side. So he's using his fingers and his knuckles against the street to try and crank up the right side of his chest. This is his only way to try and get air to get into the right lung.
You know, Doctor, showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 938, is this a related series of photographs and images?
Yes.
Your Honor, we offer State's Exhibit 938.
Any objection? 938 is received.
So, Doctor, tell us what we see here in Exhibit 938.
The focus would be, the top panel is the same as the bottom one. The bottom is just a blow-up of what you're seeing on the top. And the focus on the left-hand side is his shoulder. And again, as I mentioned, when you have difficulty in breathing, you begin with the diaphragm, the rib cage, you go on to the accessory muscles like the sternomastoid. One of the very last muscles that you will use is your shoulder. You don't really use your shoulder for breathing, but if you look here on the left-hand side, the shoulder is extremely prominent. So this would be what like people in a gym would call sculpting of the shoulder muscles, and you're seeing them standing out very prominently. So at this point on the left-hand side, he's taking a breath in, using his shoulder to try and get a breath in. And then on the right side, you see between a breath where he's relaxing. He's breathing out. And it's the two of them are shown, so as you see the marked effect on the left. But again, you have to realize that the shoulder is a very ineffective way of breathing, because at that stage, the chest is all so expanded. So when you contract your shoulder, because the chest underlying it is so expanded, you get very, very little air in. It's a very poor way of breathing, but it's what you have to do when everything else is failing. When you're in extremis, you will call on the use of the shoulder to try and breathe.
So, Dr. Tobin, have we covered the first item, that is handcuffs and the street?
Yes.
So let's talk about number 2, the knee on the neck. Explain why the knee on the neck is so significant.
The knee on the neck is extremely important because it's going to occlude the air getting in through the passageway.
So is it possible, Doctor, to perhaps even demonstrate with an anatomy lesson
Yes.
that may be relevant?
To understand the knee on the neck, you need to examine your own necks, all of you here in the jury, like I'm doing now. so, I mean, the first thing is if you put your index and thumb up here at the top of your neck, the first big thing you're going to find is your Adam's apple. And you can find the Adam's apple, and it's a very sturdy structure because it's surrounded by cartilage, and it protects the voice box, the larynx, which is essential for speaking. And so any amount of compression on the Adam's apple is not going to compress it. This is an extremely strong, sturdy structure. It's not going to be compressed by a knee on the neck. Then you go down from your Adam's apple and you feel the little bumps beneath that. And these are the rings of cartilage of your trachea, or your trachea. So this is your windpipe here. And so that's, again, because of the cartilage there, a knee on the front of that part is not going to cause compression, okay? But then bring your finger up to the top of your Adam's apple. And up at the top of your Adam's apple, you're now directly over the hypopharynx. And the hypopharynx is the crucial area in Mr. Floyd. So this here is where the hypopharynx is located on your surface anatomy.
So why is the hypopharynx important for understanding this case, what happened?
The hypopharynx is very important for understanding this case for a number of reasons, because it's so vulnerable, because it has no cartilage around it. It's going to be an area that is compressed. It's extremely small to breathe through, and it becomes very important for being able to continue to breathe through.
Doctor, I want to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 935 and 937. Could you identify, just for the record, tell us what's depicted
Yes,
there?
I'm looking at 937, which is the hypopharynx.
And then 935, there we go. And 935, which
I'm
what is
looking
it?
at 935, which is the hypopharynx with a coin.
And do these two images fairly and accurately depict the hypopharynx?
They do.
Your Honor, all for State's Exhibit 935 and 937.
935 and 937 are received.
We can show them to the jury. So, Doctor, using Exhibits 937 and 935, could you help us to better understand what the hypopharynx is and what it does?
Right. So what you're looking at here, I don't know if this works. Yeah, it does. So here at where I've drawn in red is the top of your tongue. Okay, and that's the tongue there. And then above it is an empty space. And then above that is the top of the hard palate. So that orientates you there. And say then the tongue comes down along here. And the critical structure in this case, because the act of speech in Mr. Floyd becomes very important, how he was able to speak and all these different things. So the structure that gives us speech are the vocal cords right here. And they're in the voice box and in the larynx. And then we have a little area here called the epiglottis. It's a little sliver. And that comes back to prevent food going the wrong way when we're swallowing, because we use the hypopharynx both for swallowing, for eating, and we use the hypopharynx for breathing. So when we're breathing, the air is going to come in through your nose or your mouth, go on down through the hypopharynx, then through the vocal cords and into the windpipe, into the trachea, and go on down into the lungs. Whereas when you're swallowing, that trapdoor of the epiglottis will prevent the food going into the air passages and will direct it into the food tube at the back of the esophagus. The area of the hypopharynx then is exactly from the base of the epiglottis, the first yellow arrow, down to the second yellow arrow, which is the larynx. And it's just that little area that is the size of the hypopharynx.
Could we see 935, Brett?
And so we know that the cross-sectional area of the hypopharynx in adult people, I have it here in the millimeters, 199 to 303, which are obviously difficult to remember, those type of millimeters. But in fact, right in the middle of this would be the size of a dime. So a dime is basically the size of what the hypopharynx, and it tells you how small and how vulnerable is this area. So if it's going to be decreased in size, it's a very tiny area.
And so why is the hypopharynx important in the case of Mr. Floyd?
Because the hypopharynx is going to be the area that will be vulnerable to occlusion from the knee on the neck. But in addition, the hypopharynx has another aspect, and that is the hypopharynx is also controlled by the size of your lungs. As your lungs expand, you increase the size of the hypopharynx with every breath. And so there's a regulation of that that's going on.
Was Mr. Chauvin applying force or pressure to the hypopharynx of Mr. Floyd that you observed?
At different times. It varied from time to time.
Now, are you able to tell us if Mr. Chauvin had put his weight directly, his full weight on Mr. Floyd's neck, are you able to tell us what impact or effect that would have had on Mr. Floyd?
Right. If Mr. Officer Chauvin had placed his knee directly on the hypopharynx, just that area of the dime, and it never varied from there, and it kind of came in like a bullseye on that particular area, then you would expect that this area would become totally occluded. But it did. I mean, he varied the position. Mr. Floyd varied the position of his head, and Officer Chauvin also varied the position of his knee. So it varied over time.
And if it had become totally occluded, then what?
If it had become totally occluded, within seconds you were going to drop the level of oxygen to a level that would be produce oxygen deprivation in the body, resulting in either a seizure or a heart attack, one or the other.
Do you have another photograph taken from footage at the scene that would help the jury understand this point?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 941. And this is derived from Exhibit 15 already in evidence. Do you recognize this photograph in 941?
Yes, I do.
Your Honor, we offer State's Exhibit 941.
Any objection? 941 is received.
Dr. Tobin, tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what it is you mean to convey here at Exhibit 941.
So if you're looking, say, on the one at the left, and if you look at me first before you look at that. So if you stick your finger in your ear, and you draw a line from the finger of your ear going down through the vertebral bodies in your spinal column, you can get a line going down, and you're looking at that axis. And that's what I've drawn in here with the yellow dotted line. And so if you look here on the first slide, you see that Mr. Floyd's nose, his face, is directly face down on the street. It's not at any angle. So the next thing is, again, don't look at the slide. Feel yourself on your own neck. And now, if you put your hand at the back of your neck, and you feel the bottom of your skull, and so where the bone of the skull ends, and then you come down from that, and you'll find, and you put your whole palm of your hand around it. Sorry?
Members of the jury, the witnesses ask you to do certain things. These are not required. You may do them, and he should phrase it more in terms of if you were to do that. And if you wish to do it, that is your choice. You are not required to do anything that the witness instructs you to do, but feel free to do it if you wish. Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Tobin, if we could go back to where you're explaining the anatomy in the back of the base of the skull.
Yep. So as I'm putting my hand here at the back of my neck, and I'm feeling the tip of my skull, and then I'm bringing down my hand, I'm feeling an extremely thick ligament, and that's called the nuchal ligament. And it's almost, as I put the full palm of my hand on my nuchal ligament, it's almost like wood. It's so strong a ligament. And that ligament is what you're seeing. The knee is being placed over on the left-hand slide. And so with a knee directly over the nuchal ligament, it can cause no obstruction, because this is such a dense ligament. And that's what you're seeing. And you're seeing as well with the yellow triangle, the yellow diagonal here, that the bulk of Officer Chauvin's knee is above that yellow line. The second thing, separate from this, on this slide, you can see that Mr. Floyd has his face rammed in to the street, because he's using his face here to try and crank up his chest. He's actually using his forehead and his nose and his chin as a way of trying to help him get air into the right side of his chest, as another way to crank up his chest.
And how do you contrast that to what we see in the photograph on the right in Exhibit 941?
On the right-hand side, you can see now the orientation of Mr. Floyd has changed, and also you can see the position of Officer Chauvin's knee has changed, because it's come down below the yellow diagonal, and in this position there's going to be far greater compression of the hypopharynx in this region here compared with what you were seeing on the left side. On the left side there's no compression of the hypopharynx, but on the right side, and if you watch the videos over time, you will see that there is a variation over time as to where exactly is the location of Mr. Floyd's head, and where is the location of Officer Chauvin's knee.
And in the photograph on the right, the knee is exerting, Dr. Tobin, greater force on the hypopharynx?
Correct.
Is it possible to calculate the amount of force?
Yes, it is. So we can calculate the amount of force based on the weight of Officer Chauvin, on his body weight, taking into account how much gear weight, the gear that he carries, and then also you have to remove out the weight of his shin bone and his boot, and so subtracting out all of these, and then you can calculate the weight.
Can you also calculate the changes or narrowing in the space that people have to breathe through?
Yes, you can, separately.
Would this be in any way akin to breathing through a small opening like a straw?
Yes, it would. So, I mean, when you have to breathe through a narrow passageway, it's like breathing through a drinking straw. But it's much worse than that, because breathing through a drinking straw, I mean, is somewhat unpleasant, but not that unpleasant. And then it gets much worse than that.
So as the space narrows, is it more difficult than to breathe through?
Enormously more difficult, and we know that from physics.
And through physics, then, is that something that can also be calculated?
Yes, that can also be calculated.
And that type of a calculation, would it be specific per se to George Floyd?
No, it wouldn't. This would be for anybody. For we know in terms of what happens physiologically when you have this level of narrowing, this is going to happen to everybody.
Can you please explain to the jury what those calculations would show about the effect of the narrowing on the airway, on breathing?
Right, yes. I believe there's an exhibit that relates to that.
Let me then show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 940 and 939. Yes, I do offer those.
Any objection? $939 and $940 are received.
So let's start with Exhibit 940. Dr. Tobin, tell us what's depicted here. Describe this for us.
Yep. So this is a physiology experiment, and what it's looking at is what is the effort to breathe. That's what's shown along the y-axis of the plot, and then it is with different levels of narrowing. And so the very bottom one with the white triangles, the lowest curve, that's normal. There is no narrowing. And so we see that as the flow varies, and shown in red is what would be the normal flow rate in a 46-year-old man. And we can see what is the work that is done. If you look at the normal one, and then you look at 60% airway narrowing, and this is much more narrowed than breathing through a straw. And you can see there's really no bigger increase in the effort to breathe. It's hardly different from what in terms of normal. But then if you get 85% narrowing, now you see that the effort to breathe increases 7.5 times compared with what it was with no narrowing. And so you're seeing a huge increase in the work that is required. It becomes far more difficult to breathe as the narrowing becomes more narrow.
And doctors, let's look at Exhibit 939.
So this is the science behind that plot before I showed you. And this is just the equation in physics that tells you how that works. And the key thing when you look at an equation like this, for me as a physiologist, is I focus on the square sign of the stricture. That tells me here when I see a square sign on top of it, and it is below the level on the equation, it is the denominator. I know with that you're going to be fine all along for a period of time, and then suddenly everything is going to increase enormously. You're going into what we call an exponential increase. And that's exactly what we see on the experiment that was done, where we're seeing there's really nothing happening at 60. It's nothing much. But then at 85%, it suddenly takes off. And if you had beyond 85%, it would be even more and more. And so based on the formula here, you can tell that as you are narrowing and narrowing, the effort to breathe is going to become extraordinarily high, and at some stage unsustainable. You're just not going to be able to do it.
So in this case, the case of Mr. Floyd, the narrowing was of his hypopharynx?
It was in the hypopharynx, yes.
Did the Mr. Chauvin's knee on the neck then cause the narrowing of the hypopharynx?
Yes, it did.
So given the changes that you observed in Mr. Chauvin's knee on Mr. Floyd over time, were any of those changes significant from the standpoint of placing pressure on the hypopharynx?
Yes, they're extremely significant.
Let's look right at Exhibit 947. And Your Honor, we'd offer Exhibit 947, which is taken from Exhibit 15.
Any objection? 947 is received.
Now tell us what we see here in Exhibit 947.
What you're seeing is the orientation of Officer Chauvin. His body build is quite erect here, but in particular what you're seeing is that the toe of his boot is no longer touching the ground. This means that all of his body weight is being directed down at Mr. Floyd's neck. Because in many of the calculations, I excluded the effect of his leg and his shoe because some of it was touching the ground, but here you can see none of it is touching the ground. So we're taking half his body weight plus the weight of his half the gear and all of that is coming directly down on Mr. Floyd's neck.
I want to show you what's marked as Exhibit 943. Did you assist in preparing this exhibit?
Yes, I did.
Would it help you in explaining your testimony?
Yes.
Your Honor, we offer Exhibit 943.
Any objection? Nine 43 is received.
And Your Honor, if Your Honor could clear the screen. Thank you. So, Dr. Tobin, what do we see here in Exhibit 943?
What we're seeing is that half of his body weight plus half his gear weight is coming down. That's 91.5 pounds is coming down directly on Mr. Floyd's neck.
Is that all we see?
And the reason we're seeing that is because the toe is off the ground and there is no body weight sitting back. He's not hunkering back on his heels. So everything is directed down on his knee. In this place, his shin and his toe and his boot is playing no contribution.
And were there times also when Mr. Chauvin's left knee was on the back of Mr. Floyd's neck?
Correct.
And when was that?
When his knee is on the back, that's a separate set of forces. It's the same force, but it's compressing a different area. It's compressing inside his chest.
And what about the time when Mr. Floyd would have had his face smashed directly into the pavement?
When his face is into the pavement, at that time, like one of the ones I showed you, if it's coming down on the nuchal ligament, it's going to be a huge weight for Mr. Floyd to try and breathe, but he won't be compressing the hypopharynx at the time when that's happening. So all of these different forces they're somewhat complex in terms of how they're interacting, but they're all coming to the same point.
Now, you paid particular attention, you told us, to the first 5 minutes and 3 seconds of the subdual on the ground.
Yes.
How would you characterize Mr. Floyd's oxygen levels during the first 5 minutes and 3 minutes that Mr. Chauvin was on top of him?
We know that his oxygen levels were enough to keep his brain alive, and the reason we know that is because he continued to speak over that time. We know that he made various vocal sounds for 4 minutes 51 seconds from the time that the knee is placed on the neck. And that's telling us partly that he's speaking, but the big thing is it's telling us because you can't speak without a brain being active. And so we know there's oxygen getting to his brain for whenever he is making an attempt to speak.
And Mr. Blackwell, just anytime within the next 10 minutes, it's a good breaking point. Please let the court know.
Your Honor, this would probably be a good time.
All right, let's take our 20-minute mid-morning break.